Well, I mean, I think you always have to judge the audience and change your style to make sure that ultimately your message gets across and is resonated. But I would say that in most cases, it's probably better to err on the side of being direct than indirect.
Welcome to 33 Tangents, a roundtable discussion covering a wide variety of topics from digital analytics to working remotely to current happenings in business and technology. Your hosts, Jason Thompson, John Naran, Jen Coons, and myself, Jim Driscoll, all live in different areas of the world but work together in the same company. Our regular day-to-day conversations often go off in various directions, and the goal of this podcast is to share our ideas and find new ways to engage with others. So, Jason, we have a new member of our rotating panel of guests with us today.
Yes, excited to have Bryant join us.
Yeah, it's going to be really good. So, Bryant recently joined 33 Sticks as a principal analyst, and almost from
How
the
long?
beginning,
How long ago was that? It,
with or without the vacation.
aha!
Yeah, come on now. That's how it's supposed to go. That's what I was told. When you switch companies, you're supposed to take a whole bunch of vacation right when you get started. But
Yeah.
yeah, as far as the official date, accepted in April and started right at the beginning of May.
That's gone by quickly.
Yeah, it has.
Yeah,
So,
definitely excited to have him on board.
yeah, and I know, Bryant, you were chomping at the bit to join us on one of these. So, like we were saying just before we started recording, one of the goals with this podcast was to have something not overly produced. Just enough production to polish it up a bit, but really make it just a general conversation that kind of can go in multiple different directions. So, yeah, that's we're happy to have you on today, and why don't we go ahead and dig in? Um, so, I other than Jason, so today's conversation, I want to have it based on a tweet that you put out a couple weeks ago. The minute I saw, or no, it was a LinkedIn post, not a tweet, and I grabbed it right away to save it for a conversation.
Yeah,
So as far as
I was reading it. I was reading the show prep notes, and I'm like, this sounds really familiar. I'm like, wait, I think I wrote that at some point in time.
yes, and so that's really all I have in the show prep notes. Like, really, it was like, let's use this as a catalyst for a conversation. So let me quick read the post, and then I've got a couple questions to kind of kick us off here. So what you post on LinkedIn was, and I quote, I see a pretty consistent lack of transparency and honesty in business. Perhaps it's because I'm exposed to it more on the sales side, where there's a lot of hidden meaning to the words being used, but it does seem to permeate all levels of corporate. It's like we have been groomed to be more agreeable rather than to be openly honest in certain situations. Some examples you list are, I hope we can work together again, actually equals, bye, sorry, we are really busy right now. No, this could lead to a lot more work in the future, really means, can you do some work for free for us? So you wrap it up by saying, wouldn't it just be much cleaner and easier and lead to more meaningful relationships to say what we mean? So that's what you had posted. So I really wanted to dig into that today. So the first thing to really get us started is what was the catalyst for that? Like, was there a specific event, or is it something that was building over time?
I think it's
Me joining the team, right?
that was probably part of
Yeah.
it. No, I mean, I think with most things that I post, it's a list of things that build over time, and I kind of journal and keep track of things that work well and things that bother me, and there tends to be some kind of catalyst that tips me over and say, okay, this is what I'm going to write about today. And it usually isn't a big event. It's kind of built up to it. I've tried to be sensitive about it and not post when there's some kind of larger event that happens, because inevitably I get a couple people that reach out to me and say, "Wait a minute, was that post about me?" So, I don't want people to feel like I'm necessarily calling them out. So I try not to post if there's any kind of large event or thing that happens. It's really just kind of a slow build of ideas and thoughts and frustrations that I've had. Trying to mute all my stuff because I have way too many alerts going on. Sorry. I'm trying to be quick on the mute button so you don't hear all my like alerts going off.
So it wasn't one thing in particular then. It was pretty much.
Oh, I'm sure it was. I'm sure there was something that happened that caused it to push over, but nothing that I can directly recall. As I mentioned, I'm involved pretty heavily in our sales process at 33 Sticks, and the sales process is an interesting beast in and of itself, and something that I have no formal training in. I've never done sales in any kind of formal or really informal capacity at any other point in my career. And so, this is all new to me, and part of the game of how it works was somewhat of a shock, and something I didn't really enjoy the process of very much. And there's just a lot of kind of dancing that happens in the sales process, and I just constantly think there has to be a more efficient way to go about this. And I guess that's kind of what this conversation is going to be about, is that are those kind of dances necessary? And Bryant and I think, have had some of these conversations as well. Even last week, we kind of touched on it a bit. It's like, is this necessary, or can there just be a cleaner way of getting to the point of what we all are trying to accomplish? I would like that, but maybe that's unrealistic.
Yeah, it does remind me of a lot of things that we've been kind of going through with some of the things here at 33 Sticks. And what I found, um, both here and previous areas, is that you kind of get the more direct conversations with those that are most, like, the closest to what it is you're actually talking about. And oftentimes when you're in a sales cycle, you're dealing with people that might be one, two, or even three parts removed from the actual project, and so it ends up being a lot of translation, and a lot of um, just trying to understand what common terms to us mean to them, and then being able to decipher that and go back and forth. Um, I haven't yet had too many experiences, or anything really that comes to mind, where I feel like somebody was overtly deceitful or disingenuous um, during a sales process. I've had that post sale when I've been working with clients, and that's, maybe a topic for another podcast, would be how to deal with you know uh, kind of tricky situations with clients, partners, and/or vendors. But within the sales cycle, I haven't found someone to be overtly or intentionally disingenuous.
Yeah, and I definitely don't want this conversation to be just limited to the sales process. It's what I think pushed me to talk about it. But again, I think this permeates all levels of corporate. Is that we've kind of got these different languages that we communicate in, and whether it's sales, and whether it's boss to employee, whether it's consultant to client, partners. I think to some degree we can all think about scenarios where there's not a lot of clarity in our conversation. And again, I'm open to that being a necessary part of what business is. Just in my mind, where I like simplicity and just getting to the point, and not to be a jerk about it. I think that my communication hopefully is very respectful and constructive, and not just being blunt and to the point to be blunt and to the point, but just more wanting to cut through all of the nonsense and noise to get to something that ultimately I think we're all trying to achieve.
Hmm. And one of the reasons this post resonated with me was it's more of a general conversation that my wife and I have all the time. just watching just various scenarios just in life in general. People seem to, more time than I can ever recognize, people seem to self-censor more in the efforts of trying to be polite, under the guise of being polite. So they don't necessarily tell you the full open and honest feelings. And I'm not talking about being a dick, right? I'm not talking about purposely being mean. It's they go the complete other direction and try to overly smooth over a conversation. So to play devil's advocate here, do you think these people are again like doing the same kind of thing specifically in their work life to like going from say one extreme to the other extreme now, which is trying to be overly polite and keep feelings in account?
I mean, that may be part of it. I don't know. I think honestly, part of it, people don't want to have maybe tough conversations. And I guess that's why it's so apparent in the sales process is that that's a difficult conversation for lots of people. And I'm gonna pull up, what did I say? I said I hope we can work together again. It's hard when you've had a partnership and the people on the ground have really enjoyed working with each other and they've created a bond, but there's higher levels, there's budget approvals, there's maybe shrinking budgets, and there's things that may be out of their control. And while what they really mean is, we're probably not going to work together in their near future, that's a difficult conversation for them to have. Maybe they don't fully control all of the variables in play there, but ultimately, they don't want to make someone feel bad or mad with someone they've had a good relationship with over a project or an employment term or what have you.
Well, is that potentially, what we always heard from our parents growing up? Don't burn bridges. Maybe it wasn't a positive experience, and instead of being confrontational about it, maybe it's not a lack or an avoidance of confrontation, but simply a different way that they're messaging with you to stay in touch potentially as things change in the future.
Yeah, and again, I think that is the case. I think that is absolutely what they're trying to message. And in my mind, I don't see it as burning bridges to have that clarity of conversation. But maybe my perspective is unrealistic, and maybe most people don't think that way. I actually need to. I think I have it on my shelf. I need to go back and reread Crucial Conversations. Did either one of you read that series of books or one of the books in that series?
I
I
have
haven't,
not.
I haven't even heard of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe that shows my age. At one point in time, back at the Novell, there was a list of books for those of us that had a vision of moving into management one day that we were asked to read, and I think Good to Great was on there. I think there's a series of two or three books in this line around having tough conversations. It's called Crucial Conversations, and I want to say that part of that was just having a lot of intentionality in what you're communicating and not dancing around the subject or deflating it by using different wording. But I completely respect the point that you bring, Brian, is that they really do see a potential, whatever future, and they're not really being as clear cut as maybe I would like the situation to be. I just think that there can be a little bit more balance from having these very smoothed over conversations and just being a little bit more honest isn't the right word, just a little bit more transparent in the current state of things.
Maybe more direct is what you're looking for, and more,
Direct's a good
uh,
word.
cutting out any of the filler there.
So
It is it
what
is funny though. Like you just made me think though. Like is you're talking about books that you read or whatever, and a lot of people that we work with in the industry or in the field have gone through very formal education, right, and gone through business school, and I don't remember having a class to learn this language, but it seems a lot of people that have gone through the formal training, so to speak, through university and academics do speak the language.
Yeah.
right? And it's maybe it's just on the job learning.
Yeah, I don't think I can't recall any formal coursework either, but it seems like, as I put in my post, we're kind of groomed for it.
Right.
And, whether that's through direct management, grooming, or we're just picking up on what we're seeing those around us do. And we think, okay, well, those people are in a position that I want to be in. Maybe I should replicate the way that they are talking and approaching things. I don't know. It'd be interesting to kind of dissect that and figure out where ultimately it's coming from. With that said, I think most managers are pretty bad, and not because they don't have a lot of great skills. It's actually a company problem, honestly. And this is probably a different episode, and I say that 2 or 3 times every time we record, so I'm going to be sensitive to not say that too much. But we promote really really smart people and think this person was an amazing individual contributor, so the natural path is obviously to promote them into management. Go manage, and we don't give them any training or any mentoring, and we think, you know what, just make it happen. And so what they end up doing is just replicating what they've seen. Now, if they're in a great environment, then that's awesome, but if they're replicating bad ways of managing, that's just not ideal. I'm interested. So you come from a strong management background in your career. I'm interested. I don't want to out you in your personal style, but the style that you've had, or maybe you've seen others had when it comes. We've talked sales process. Have you seen this play out in the manager employee relationship, whether it's through formal feedback or otherwise, where we've kind of maybe danced around the core topic with some language that softens things when maybe we should be a little bit more, what was the word you used? Direct?
Yeah, yeah, direct. Um, yeah, I do think that there's a lot of similarity in the manager versus employee or team member um, relationship and communication that can happen there. And I think, and I saw this a lot in my various leadership roles, in which kind of the big difference between a very effective leader, and I'm going to specifically talk about when there's maybe performance issues or there's a problem, right? Because I think that's where we often see, great leaders versus just kind of ineffective leaders really shine. And what I've seen is that the ones that are less effective managers or leaders at a company avoid that conversation or indirectly have that communication. Maybe they'll send out a team email, and they're really trying to talk to one person on the team, but they're sending out an entire team email saying, "Hey, everybody, let's make sure we get this report done on Mondays correctly. There's been some challenges with the team in doing so." In reality, we all know it's Bob, right?
So,
And
so,
everybody
so
on the
why do we
team,
do that? So
yeah,
why do we do that?
yeah, yeah, and everybody on the team's like, well, gosh, it's Bob. We know Bob sucks at getting that report done on time. Like, why didn't he just talk to Bob? And by the way, I don't know a Bob, so we're creating a non
We,
enemy.
we, 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 we know we know a Bob, and it's definitely not that Bob that we know.
Oh,
So
yeah,
it's just
yeah.
it's just a fill in the blank.
Bob Ross. Bob Ross is the Bob I was referencing. But yeah, and what I would find is that would so as a team member, where I thought myself to be a high performing team member, I would always just disregard those emails and say, well, I know I'm doing that right, and I'm wondering who they're talking to. When I became a manager and a people leader, I avoided sending out group emails or things like that unless there was a group problem, in which I would have an email about it and then I would address it in a team meeting, to have the conversation. And so the flip side is, then what is a great leader? What do they look like and how do they communicate there? And I had multiple instances in which I had an opportunity to coach and mentor some low performing team members that maybe didn't have the right skills in place or had some performance issues or just challenges. And my style was always very authentic, and one in which I would approach that conversation very openly, and ask to get validation from them if they saw the problems as well, and actually help bring them to my side of the table, so to speak, to have that conversation. So it's a joint effort, and it wasn't just somebody talking down at them and, hey, you need to change this, this, and this, but validate it, reaffirm it, you talk about ways to improve and move forward. But there's some similarities there, but I do feel, we're digressing a little bit from kind of the original, but hopefully that's some helpful insight at least.
That's the whole structure of this podcast. We
Start
kind
with
of
a topic
meander
and
and
into a tangent.
yeah, I mean, we kind of meander and wander, and there have been some episodes in the past where we've had one topic, and at the very end, we were like, we recorded a completely different topic than that, and that's okay. One of our visions was we wanted this to truly be just a snapshot into a group of people sitting around and having a conversation. And one of the things that I think Jim and I have disliked about a lot of the podcasts that are out there is just the overly produced nature, scripted nature of things. And if you spend any amount of time with me, you'll learn that I'm a huge fan of documentary film, but very, very raw, unscripted, very minimal editing. Documentary film that to me resonates very heavily with me, and that's kind of what we were trying to replicate with this podcast is just dropping in and listening to people talk about a subject, and in life those conversations tend to wander, and that's okay.
And that's why sometimes I come in with notes and questions to get a topic started, but I'm also kind of curious where we end up. Like, and that's the thing going with the overly produced podcasts. You always feel like they chop the interviews, and I'm not talking about any one in particular, but I feel many out there chop the interviews to get to exactly what they want. It's not just a raw recording, and you just kind of end up in a spot. So nope, digress away. I think it just adds to the flavor.
For sure. So I'm interested in either one of your opinions or both on where you've had the opportunity to be a bit more direct in your conversation, the effect it's had on the relationship. Has it strained it, or has it given an opportunity to build an even stronger, more trust-based relationship?
There's one that immediately comes to mind because I had a genuine conversation with a client this morning. So we're ramping up toward the heavy period, and requests are flying fast and furious. Plus, we have the main goals we set out to have certain things in place by September, and request came in, and like just Friday was crazy for me, so I just kind of fired off an email, and it just sat with me all weekend. I'm like, damn, I hope that didn't come across as like too curt, because it was basically me saying no. I had to, I basically had to say no to a request. It was definitely out of scope, and I'd like to be able to point them in the right direction. But the point I was trying to make is we'd love to be able to help here, but then this will distract from the items that are in scope for our agreement, the goals that we've set out at the beginning of this year. One little thing like this could distract from it. And so I was talking to our main stakeholder this morning, and we were going on a couple things. I said, listen, I just hope it didn't come across as kind of like curtain root. It was just a crazy Friday trying to get stuff out before the end of the week, and I wanted to get an answer back to you, and he's like, no. But we have those kind of conversations where we tell each other no, or we say, hey, there is a problem, and with you have to be mature on both sides and face criticism and be open to discussing ways to make things better, and just open in general. And over the last few years, kind of getting to that point, instead of being a people pleaser, going in and saying, we have a problem here, or them coming and saying like, hey, a couple big mistakes went out the door the last couple weeks. What's going on? And trying to get to the bottom of the problem. And with those very genuine conversations, I think we've gotten we've gotten much better. We are able to, on the regular, just on the fly, not even have to say, hey, could we sit down and have a heart-to-heart? That kind of email, like, we need to sit down and talk. We'll call each other and say, here's what I'm seeing. or even today, just attempting to fall on the sword and say, "Hey, I hope it didn't come across that way. I didn't mean it that way." And here's what I meant, and he's like, no, I didn't take it that way. So I'm the one starting to meander and just ramble. Um, but no, that's actually what I came up. It came to mind right away.
Yeah, and so while you're talking, I pulled up my original post on LinkedIn and I'm going through some of the comments, and it's interesting to hear several of the words that have already come up in this episode, as far as why. So one of the comments is management consulting is how they got into practice. Mindless repetition of their use has drawn them into a safe distance communicating to soften the blow or preserve whatever positive sentiment remains. And here's the key. Where it's preferred to burning a bridge. So I think Bryant may have mentioned that. There's also some posts in here around, I wouldn't call those examples dishonest, but they're not very direct. So it's interesting to see, at least the limited number of responses that I got to this post using the same wording that we're using. Overall, I think there was one person that said, and I don't know if it was in tongue in cheek or not, saying that being direct is considered blunt and rude. But other than that, everyone else seemed to say communication would be better if it was more direct and to the point. And then listing several of the words that we use for why it's not being used, yet it's so prevalent. We continue to use this style of speaking, and again, maybe that's not bad. And I'm okay saying that maybe my expectations are out of alignment and that I need to appreciate part of that dance. I'm totally open to being at that point.
I don't know. See, I would disagree. And again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. Like, don't be a dick about it. Don't be mean. Don't be rude. But at the same time, be bit more direct. And I know for me, one of my biggest flaws is sometimes I do dance around things instead of getting straight to the point. And I found when I do get straight to the point, things are better. Again, whether it's something that comes in, someone says, "Hey, can you take a look at this for me?" Instead of saying, "Well, let me see," and you're just saying, unfortunately, it's not in the scope of our agreement. Here's the best place to go look for that. And then again, that's one specific example. It just kind of, okay, we're going to move on and get to the stuff that we really need to get to.
So I've been listening to both of you, and you're triggering a whole lot of experiences and thoughts, and reminding me of things. And I want to I want to maybe tag onto something you were saying, Jim, about some conversations you were having with a client even this morning. And I think that a lot of the directness that can or can't happen is dependent on maturity, and I'm talking two types of maturity. One is the social maturity or communication maturity of the individuals participating in the conversation, but also the maturity of the relationship. And a mature relationship doesn't have to be one over a long amount of time, but it's one that in which there's a mature level of respect to be able to have that conversation. Um, and and I think if there isn't that maturity there, we often find ourselves dancing around with words to maybe make it less direct. So it's just a thought I had as you were talking through it. The other thing that I thought of was, kind of times in my career in which I have been spoken to very directly. Again, not somebody with ill intent, but very directly indicating what they needed. And there's a very specific time in which I was working at an ad agency, and was preparing to send a deliverable out to a client. I had put in, I'll admit, I'd probably given it like an 80% effort, and I was under the timeline and I needed to get it out. So I sent it over to the account manager to review, which that's another topic for conversation. Um, Companies that don't do internal reviews before things go to in front of clients. That'd be a real interesting conversation. But I needed to send it to them for review because they want to make sure everything was up to the standards. And she came back within minutes and said, "This isn't the standard of work that we put in front of our clients. And my immediate response was, well, gosh, like that should work. It answers what they need. And she gave some very specific feedback of how to tailor it and make it more in line with their company brand and their messaging. And I went back and revisited it and gave it 110%, and it was met with appreciation, and the client definitely had a better experience there. But that directness from that individual who wasn't a direct manager, had no say in anything about my career, but we were part of a cohesive team to try and achieve a really positive experience for our client. Wouldn't put up with 80% effort in that particular case. And that was something that stuck with me for a long time. And again, kind of back to that maturity level, and the directness. There was a level of maturity from her to tell me that, and it was in the interest of our client and what the needs were there. And so there was a maturity about looking at that account, as well as the maturity of the company to be able to say, we're not going to put that out in front of the client.
So I think you answered the question I'm going to ask when you said it stuck with you a long time. But as you were sharing that experience, the question that came to my mind is, did you ultimately walk away with that as a not only a positive experience, but something that ultimately added to you being better at what you do, more mature in what you do, and something that made you a stronger contributor in the long run?
Oh, it absolutely stuck with me and has shaped a lot of conversations I've had. Back to when I was talking about kind of coaching up some underperforming team members and things like that. Like that, that's one of those experiences that I find myself oftentimes not remembering a lot of things. As uh, whether it be personal or family things, I tend to forget a lot of things. But that particular instance, like it was galvanized in my who I am both professionally and personally, to kind of know, like, am I going to have that level of effort, or am I going to have less? And why would I do something less? But it was definitely a real positive thing. And that same level of conversation, I think, could have had a really negative impact, should I been in a different state of mind, or
Mm,
a different level of maturity myself in my career.
yeah.
I could have let that really spin me out and get ticked off and go to my boss and say, "Can you believe what so and so said? Like, this work is really good," and kind of created a firestorm. But in that particular instance, I feel like I made the right decision, and really kind of took it internally, and made some changes.
I think about it. I think about it a lot. I I really look up to Chef Ramsay. And I know a lot of what we see on TV is probably manufactured, but I think at the core of it, a lot of it has to do with his style and personality. And we've had a lot of internal meetings where I've used his framework as a framework for discussion. And although I don't think I'm as direct and blunt as him, I don't know, Jim. Maybe I've had some fairly direct feedback and conversations with the team, and maybe I need to be a little bit tougher at times. But I really look up to that model, and I think if we're going to do something amazing together, and if we're going to take the company to rarefied air, and bring individuals along with us to be able to participate in that we really can't afford to dance around and pretty up some of the conversations. And again, it's not about being a jerk or aggressive or rude. It's about we're trying to accomplish something really, really hard. Business in general is really, really difficult, and not being direct and clear in communication doesn't help that. And I think if I am able to achieve any level of replicating myself after Chef Ramsay, I feel pretty happy with what I've been able to achieve. But I think it's his style and directness. I think has a lot to do with what he's been able to accomplish. Jim and I and some other members of the team, we had dinner at Hell's Kitchen in Vegas
Nope, I wasn't
earlier.
there.
Oh, Jim wasn't there.
I was there. Everybody else was. I missed out.
Everyone else was there. Jim wasn't there. So I'm going to share the story because he wasn't there.
I
I think
wasn't
we
there either.
I think we had a picture of you on a cell phone and put it at one of the spaces on the table, so we felt
Yeah, I
like you
think
were
that's
there.
what we did.
You know, I kind of was hesitant to do it because I'm like, you know what, this is gonna be gimmicky. You know, it's the whole Hell's Kitchen thing. It's modeled after the layout of the show. You know, it's gonna be like going to TGI Fridays in Times Square. It's just gonna be so gimmicky and not good. And it was one of the better culinary experiences I've had in my life. I mean, every aspect of how the restaurant was ran, the level of the quality of the food, the knowledge of the staff, I was like absolutely blown away and impressed. And I'm like, there's no way he can do this and scale this across multiple restaurants without having a high standard and being direct and to the point about maintaining that standard. Sorry, Jim. Now you're wanting me to make up for not having you eat with us at Hell's Kitchen.
Yeah, pretty much. But so my follow up question then is when is direct too direct? Like when again, I think what we're starting to come to is as far as the conclusion goes, it's better to be direct more often than not. But when is direct being too direct where it could be counterproductive?
Well, I mean, I think you always have to judge the audience and change your style to make sure that ultimately your message gets across and is resonated. But I would say that in most cases, it's probably better to err on the side of being direct than indirect, because I've seen conversations in the past and ones that I've been the driver of that have ultimately been catastrophic because I was worried about how my words would be received, so I kind of danced around the issue and kind of prettied it up. And at the end of the call, I'm like, okay, I feel good. At least I didn't make someone feel bad or cry, and I got my point across. But what ended up happening is I thought one thing, the person I was delivering the message to thought something completely different, and we continued to go drift apart. And I'm like, what the hell is wrong with this person? We very clearly had this conversation that something's wrong, but in their mind they heard no, everything is great because I was scared to be direct. So I don't know how to answer the question, Jim, because I think there are some times where being overly direct maybe is harmful. But from my past experiences and screwing this up royally myself in the past, I think I'm at a point where I would much rather err on the side of being more direct and then be able to help people understand and ultimately feel better than being less direct and not getting the message across that needs to get across.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when Bryant was talking, I actually thought of a situation not similar, but not in the case of was in a meeting with an account manager on an account I had been working on for a while, but this is a different account manager. I'd never really worked with them in the past. Sitting in a conference room with them, and he came off like super aggressive. Instead of just asking like, why aren't we doing this or can we do that? And it was, and I'm not saying dance around, but it was the why the F aren't we doing this? Why the F is it broken? And I'm like, well, first of all, it's not broken. But again, the way he just kind of launched into it in a very accusatory manner, like I got my back up. And so I'm like, okay, who the F are you? I'm meeting you for the first time today.
Thank you for helping keep our podcast free of the explicit tag.
No, I mean, in my mind, I'm sitting there across the table from him. I'm like, who the F are you? Why are we having this conversation? I've never heard that this was a problem before. And instead of kind of trying to, instead of us trying to find a middle ground and whatnot, we both, like, I mean, we never got along. And I think that was like the immediate catalyst for why we never got along, because it was just, I got my back up, and it was that way for the next couple of years with him.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, and maybe we take the last few minutes of this episode. One of the things that we like to do is hopefully leave our listeners with something tangible that they can walk away with. And this conversation, I think, affects everyone. Everyone that is listening to this, I think, is in fact affected one way or another. Whether they're receiving communication, whether they're giving it, or whether the lack of ability to be direct in conversation is holding them back from advancement in their careers. I think this conversation really does impact everybody. So, what can we do to offer advice, and maybe this is turned back on us. So, what can I do to be a better manager? Are there is it about reading books and coming up with techniques? Is it about courses? To Brian's point, it's not like we've ever formally been taught these things, or is it more about just sitting down with mutual respect for each other and saying, here's what we'd like to solve for, and I want to be more direct. Can we build that into our relationship? What do we want people to walk away with as far as what they can do to help be better communicators?
Hmm. I mean, for me, I kind of try. I start with keeping it simple and the no a holes rule, right? And when when it comes to that, is don't be one yourself. Um, be direct, be to the point, but also just make sure you're not being a jerk about it. But then, to your point, is you know, I, it's great to read books. I try to keep up on key things. I don't read every book that comes down the pike, but I try to find some good recommendations on things. The reason I say so is like just because you read a book doesn't mean you're actually going to do anything. It's putting it into practice, and I think it comes back to building rapport with those that you work with, whether it's a client or your internal colleagues, and building that relationship to where you start having those conversations. You start having those discussions and start talking about, can we be more direct about this, or and maybe it starts off with, because if you think about if you think of relationship with a client, you start off with by doing that dance and feeling each other out, but maybe it's kind of just asking directly, hey, can I be blunt about this specific situation? Because a lot of times most people are going to say like, yeah, give it to me straight, and then that's your opening to have more of those conversations in the future.
Brian, what do you think? I mean, again, you're fairly new. You kind of have the beginner's mind with how we operate at 33.6. What recommendations do you have? What have you seen that we do that works? What can we do better? You've had the opportunity to see our style a little bit on the sales side. We've had some one-on-ones so far. Would love your insights.
Yeah, I'll first say that I kind of knew, you and I have known each other for years, and I knew the culture that I was interviewing with before I made the decision. So I think I've got a little bit more than just, a couple of months of kind of working with you on that I could base it off of. But I think that there's so much that goes into communication. I mean, there's countless books, there's countless seminars, there's consultants that do nothing but communication consulting out there. And for me, it's all about who you are as an individual, your authenticity, your integrity, not speaking on something that you don't know just for the sake of speaking. I think that's a big part of why people are indirect as well, is they want to sound like they know something, but they don't really know what they're talking about, so they'll use more words than necessary. Um, and then, just another thought that came to mind here was about just society in general and where we are today. We live in a society in which it's about ratings and reactions, and there are entire careers of people that their entire livelihood is based off of being the snarkiest or the wittiest in a moment, for a very short-lived blast of impressions or views or anything like that, and keep a long-term vision in mind when you have communications. um, and then one final thing is that, Jason, you mentioned, you thought you'd have these conversations with individuals and you'd say one thing, but they'd hear another. I think that speaks volumes to just the state of mind of those that are participating in communication. I mean, we had a loss in the family. My wife's grandmother passed away a week ago, and I had to take some time off. But being aware of like other things that are going on in people's lives and the communication that you will have with them is going to directly impact maybe the way you message something to
Yeah.
individuals, and things that have nothing to do with the communication itself, but the style of communication that's needed. And oftentimes we don't have insight into that with people we have, kind of short-lived or very immature relationships in a sales cycle, for example. But um, that oftentimes will explain a lot of miscommunication issues that I've seen
Yeah.
is things that are unrelated and impacting people in their personal lives that just make it harder to see what the message is that I'm trying to get out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up. Jim, have we had a podcast on that topic in the past? I know that that theme has been woven into a lot of our conversations, and it's central to our culture and beliefs as a company that business is personal. And not only is it okay, we really push our team to have personal relationships. To Bryant's point, it really changes the way that you communicate. And the outer world has said that you have to keep business business. You can't make this personal. You can't. It's not about understanding who the person is you're working with. This is just a business relationship. We reject that. And I can't remember if we've had a conversation specifically on that topic, but it is something that is so central to the way that we operate.
You and I have talked about it so many times. Um, I don't think we've done an individual episode on it, but yeah, we've touched on it a lot as part of other conversations. But let me go back and look through and see if I can't put something together about that, because
Let
yeah,
me
but I know you and I have had a lot of conversations about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just reminded me of another thing. And if you've heard this from me, personally, I know I've told you this, Jason, on probably more than one occasion, but it bears it's worth repeating, and that is, that my career has essentially been in technology or technology consulting. I haven't been a soldier. I haven't been a doctor. I haven't been somebody out there actually saving lives, I guess is what I'm saying. And my day to day in business to business is about, helping companies either make more money or change experiences with customers. And um, in the end, it's about the personal relationships that I'm building and the impact that I can have on others that that will be kind of in 40 years or whenever I decide to stop working or retire or whatever it might be, that I'll have to look back on and realize what I did. It's not that I consulted with Nike at one point, or I had this engagement with Samsung and I helped them improve conversion rates, or I helped deploy, analytics on Abbott Laboratories or whatever it might be. Like I won't care about that, but it's that I helped Jason with this client, or I helped Jim learn something, or other clients that I'm working with. I helped them get to jobs that they otherwise wouldn't have, and how did I have an impact on them as individuals and spread that. It's kind of the way that I've lived my life in my professional life and career.
I can't think of a better way to wrap it up.
I can't either.
And
So
Bryant has been an absolute natural. I think he was a little worried about joining us, but naturally fit right into the conversation. So if you're ready for it or not, I think we need to have you back on more in the future.
Yeah, hopefully. Were you talking about the listener being ready for it or not, or me? I don't know. That could have gone both ways there. Maybe you're not communicating very directly there, Jason.
You're right. I do know I do know that I heard from a few listeners about John and their sadness, and they've really enjoyed him on the podcast. And not a replacement, but definitely a good fill in for the future, and you bring a good voice to the conversation. So I think the listeners will be happy with the addition. And my point was more to, I think you were a little bit worried about being ready for the conversation, but you just naturally fit right in.
I think we're good. I appreciate the opportunity and glad to be a part of this team.
Cool. Thanks, Jim.
All right. Thanks, guys. Great conversation.
See ya.
Later. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. We hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to reach us, you could do so by emailing podcast@33sticks.com or on the web at www.33sticks.com. The 33 Tangents podcast is a production of 33 Sticks.